And you're contributing a lot, of course, to the society in future and to the industry in future. So for that reason, I'd like to invite you to have a look into the topic of supply chain traceability and risk monitoring. At first, a bit the question, when it is about the supply chain, what are the risks related to supply chain? So what are the risks about? And of course, there are several reports published each year regarding risk within the supply chain. Let's have a look. Of course, you can quickly think about geographical risks, risks that your supply chain does get disruptive by any issues, maybe due to some weather conditions or climate change, or other risks like cybersecurity, cyber attacks, or similar risks. What is also mentioned quite often at the top 10, top 15 is the risk of the patchwork of laws, regulations, and also, of course, rules. As you can see in the report here, as you can also see here, and there is a risk, as there are so many regulations and rules, of course also of failure, and in general it's just an increasing, let's say, demand on being compliant to those regulations. But of course those regulations has a broad scope. One scope or one aspect is the topic of due diligence. And as you can see here on the slide, the topic of due diligence, due to the importance of ESG and sustainability, so that means environmental, social, as well as governance aspects, has increased a lot during the last 1-2 decades. And of course, this also relates to the initiatives driven by the European Union. You know probably about the Green Deal we are driving here in Europe. And there are regulations and directives like the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It is about the deforestation regulation, battery regulation. It is also about Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, as well as the EU Forced Labor Regulation. So quite a lot. Let's have a look on those regulations a little bit more into deep. As also, or especially regarding the current year 2025, there is the demand, the requirement to comply already with some of those regulations. So this is on the one hand the European Battery Regulation, which is asking you regarding your supply chain to take a deep look from your raw material perspective. So that means, where does nickel come from, where does cobalt come from, and to have a focus on the due diligence aspects. Similar, the deforestation regulation. Here there are some products in scope of this regulation. Rather is maybe one of the products that might be also relevant for your supply chain and production activities. And it's quite urgent. It's almost tomorrow to be compliant to those regulations, especially when we are talking about due diligence. So that means the European Battery Regulation is already needed to comply to in August this year, and the deforestation regulation by end of this year. Similar with the other regulations just mentioned, so that means the due diligence directive, as well as the reporting directive and the labor, forced labor regulation. Also those are of course relevant to report about your activities, your material aspects, and the effectiveness at 2027. But of course, if you want to report about it in 2027, you have to implement and you have to be active on those topics already in 2026. So again, almost tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. What is the similarity of all those regulations? Let's have a look at it. And as you can see, those regulations always focus on due diligence and the value chain and the supply chain. And so that means, in general, where do you get your raw materials from? So far, so good. but let's have a look a little bit and more deep on the due diligence aspect. So what is due diligence about? And this is a question, especially the question, how do I implement due diligence in my organization, in my company? This question was answered a couple of years ago by OECD. And from there, let's say, an implementation approach was developed. And of course, it is focusing on the main categories and risks that are relevant for the supply chain. On the one hand, due diligence is always about environmental aspects, so the important elements like water, air, soil, also noise and the plants. As well, on the other hand, then human and labor rights perspective, so that means child and forced labor, as well as occupational health and safety, trade union freedom, and so on and so forth. And all the regulations I mentioned look into those topics from their different perspective and angles. So that means, as I explained, the UBR with the raw materials and the battery and the modules, the EUDR maybe mainly focusing from your perspective to the rubber, as well as the CSCD with the Supply Chain Due Diligence Directive has a general, more broad scope on the topic of due diligence. But let's have a look on how to implement due diligence in an organization. And as I said, the OECD has come up with a guideline how to do so. At first, it is important to embed responsible business conduct in your management system, in your policies. So that means to agree, let's say, with the top management on the due diligence aspect, its importance, and to include it in the systems, in the processes, to ensure it can be implemented in the organization, can be further cascaded, internally communicated, and trained. The next step is, of course, to identify and assess the adverse impacts in your supply chain, in your operations. So that means you need to analyze risks that are related to your activities, and of course to, let's say, classify the risk due to its importance. Afterwards, it is of course relevant to seize, prevent and mitigate those adverse impacts by the right activities and measures you are driving. So it means it is important to analyze your supply chain in depth and to know where are the raw materials come from and which risks relate to. Afterwards, it is relevant, of course, to track the measures you have planned and implemented to see if they are effective, if they are well implemented, if there is anything to be improved. And afterwards, you will publish a report based on your activities, explaining the activities, as well as, let's say, the effectiveness, and this in a, let's say, easy manner. So that means that interested parties, third parties, can have access to those informations. And last but not least, if there is any issue, so then of course regarding the adverse impacts, of course you provide for and cooperate in remediation, and then also of course grievance mechanism comes into place. When we have a look in this circle, and we transfer it maybe a little bit into another shape, and this is where our experience comes from. So that means we start again with the implementation of the responsible business conduct. So to start with training, to know about the risk, to analyze the risks, also to monitor their activities and to have a close look into the supply chain. It comes with, let's say, special activities related to those processes, to those aspects. And of course, we, from our experiences, have the technical competencies to support the customers wherever they have a need to. So wherever there is a need, we can support with let's say, different pillars, different activities here to ensure you can implement the due diligence system and policies very well in your organization. The stream is not to be written or seen or read end to end. So that means wherever you need the support, of course you can get the support. What is to be seen separated is the third-party activities on the very right-hand side. So that means whenever it comes to a third-party activity, in this case we are talking about verification, it's third-party, neutral and objective, of course. So for that reason we offer, let's say, pillars from those journey, but not provided end to end. But let's have a look and a bit of focus on the topic of auditing in the supply chain. On the one hand, and from our experiences, we developed an audit methodology following the ESG risk criteria. So that means we developed an audit scheme to support you auditing in the supply chain. Because auditing in the supply chain on site and based on document review is, let's say, the best practice approach regarding your due diligence system. And to prove that the system is a robust one, of course, based on the activities on site with the supplier, you gain information on the gaps, and afterwards you can work with the supplier based on our report on the gaps to ensure that the deviations can be closed. Next to this audit methodology, there are, of course, many global standards. There are industry standards and also collaborative initiatives which helps you as well as the supply chain to, let's say, show and to prove your commitment to due diligence and responsible business conduct. On the slide, there are many standards. Some standards are more with a focus on social, human and labor rights. Other standards are more focusing on environmental aspects. Other standards, again, are more broad for, let's say, each and everybody. Other standards, again, are more focused for a specific industry. For example, like RCI for the automotive industry, or ASI for the aluminium industry, as well as, and that's what I would like to point out, is the Solar Stewardship Initiative, which was developed and driven by the solar industry. So that means here we have a common understanding how the solar industry would like to tackle due diligence. So let's have a look on this initiative on the next slide. But as you can see, we have also a global footprint. So that means we can help you wherever you or your suppliers are. That means we have local colleagues which know at first the local law and regulations, which is quite important for such an activity, and speak the local language. But let's get back to the Solar Stewardship Initiative. So the initiative developed two standards to support ESG and due diligence. That means on the one hand, in 2023, the standard for ESG was developed and can be certified. In addition, or the second standard is about the traceability. But let's stay with the first one, so that means it's focusing and defining criteria for environmental, social, as well as governance aspects, and of course addresses to the manufacturers in the solar industry. Similar with the second standard, which is quite new, it was published end of last year. So that means also here aspects mentioned or included, like management system and responsibilities, as well as outsourced contractors, and last but not least, the material accounting system. And at the moment, this standard focuses a lot on the silicon aspects, but it will be further expanded to other materials like glass or other aspects that are relevant for the production. Yeah, let's get back to the roadmap and let's have a focus on the verification topics. So this is really the, let's say, proper third-party activity. So that means On the one hand, we provide a so-called pre-verification. So that means under real circumstances and conditions, we check your processes, your system in place regarding due diligence and your responsible business conduct. And from here, of course, we focus on regulatory best practice frameworks you have implemented, on policies and procedures, your risk management, the question how you monitor your suppliers, and so on and so forth. And as an outcome, you get, of course, a report which is showing the deviations from the set of criteria, from the set of requirements, and the methodology that is used. We are on site, of course, using interviews with the top management, with the employees, with the worker, but also with some other stakeholders like suppliers to get an overall picture about the status quo of your diligence management system. Yes, and in addition, and that's the last aspect then here, after the pre-verification, of course, you can also use the chance to get properly verified. So that means there is really then an attestation behind. So it means similar like a certificate. As an output of those activities, you will get a confirmation of what we have seen that can be also used for external communication. And such an activity is mandatorily requested, for example, by the European Battery Regulation. So this is something that is mandatorily asked or required for doing so once in a year. Yeah, last but not least, I'd like to invite you to our Sustainability Navigator. So please feel free to scan the QR code if you like. It's an assessment you can do online and on demand, of course, to check your status quo. You can use this navigator as often as you like to check after a certain time again and again, and if you like again, your status. And if there are some issues you would like to have a little bit a more close look, then please feel free to contact us to exchange about your needs. Thank you very much.
Thank you.